Hey, I'm Alison Stone. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the Victorian philosopher Julia Wedgwood. She is the subject of my book, The Philosophy of Julia Wedgwood, Imperfect Antithesis. Wedgwood lived from 1833 to 1913, and she was a major intellectual presence on the Victorian scene. She wrote two big books, The Moral Ideal from 1888 and The Message of Israel from 1894. She also wrote two biographies and around 150 journal articles. And she collected just a handful of those articles into her book 19th Century Teachers, which came out in 1909. So she was prolific. She was very productive. Her interests were incredibly wide. She wrote about the history of civilizations and religions, moral theory, the origins of language, evolutionary theory and its metaphysical implications. She wrote on art and literature, the problem of free will. She wrote a lot about feminism, women's issues, and she engaged with debates in theology and an array of figures from ancient and modern philosophy. What's quite remarkable is that despite all of this, she has been erased from history. There have only been two previous full-length studies of her work, an older biography by her descendant Barbara Wedgwood and a much more up-to-date recent biography by Sue Brown. Wedgwood's case therefore illustrates very well the way women philosophers have been written out of historiography, even though they were present in the actual history of philosophical thinking. With my book, then, I want to help to write Wedgwood back into history. And I focus particularly on her writings from the 1870s and 1880s. I argue that they have an organising focus on imperfect antithesis, which is a distinctive concept of hers. She says no law of thought seems to us to have a wider range than what we would call the law of imperfect antithesis. And what does she mean? Well, her view is that experience and reality are pervaded by opposites, such as truth and falsity, praise and blame, the good and the bad. But the opposites for her are generally never symmetrical. Instead, they take a slightly varying form. She also uses the metaphor of how you look at your face in a mirror, and the mirror image will be subtly different from the face looking into it. We've got opposites, but they don't perfectly mirror one another. Just one of her applications of this, for example, is that somebody might deserve to be praised for behaving a certain way, but it doesn't follow that if they do the opposite thing, they ought to be blamed. This overarching idea of imperfect antithesis, it's a bit of a tongue twister, I suggest, runs through her views on a whole spectrum of issues: pain and pleasure, self-sacrifice and selfishness, the self and relationships with others, free will and determinism, the natural and the supernatural. And in all these cases, she argues there are genuine oppositions here, but asymmetrical ones. She also gives this concept of imperfect antithesis a historical aspect, where it becomes the law of recoil, as she calls it, in which people recoil from one form of social life continually towards an almost opposite one. For example, they recoiled from prehistoric matriarchy, in her view, to patriarchy with classical Greece. And that's just one of many historical recoils that she traces out across history. Now, one of the challenges when recovering her work is that originally she published a lot of it anonymously, which was normal. It was absolutely normal in the Victorian period for men and women for journal articles to be anonymous. But it presents a challenge for us today. I used digital stylometry as well as archival research to rediscover a large number of her journal articles. And this book explains the methods and the attributions. Thus, as well as introducing you to Wedgwood's thought and sometimes criticising her views, I also intend this book to be a contribution to digital humanities, to showing how we can use new digital methods to restore women into the history of intellectual life and philosophy. Well, I hope this short talk has whetted your appetite to read about Wedgwood and take the chance to engage with her ideas and restore her to the place she deserves in the history of philosophy and thought.